He locked his wife inside a freezer and walked away. Certain the cold would finish what he started. But here's the question no one was ready to ask. How does a woman survive 5 days buried in ice by the man she trusted most? Because somewhere between silence and sub-zero, something went wrong. A sound was heard, a secret surfaced, and the part he didn't plan for was waiting to expose him. The house held its breath the way animals do before a storm. Snow pressed against the windows, muting the street, swallowing sound until even the clock seemed afraid to tick. Ethan Carter stood alone in the kitchen, hands steady, eyes calm, listening to the hum beneath the floor. It was constant, obedient, reliable. The freezer never complained. Neighbors would have described the Carters as quiet, respectable, the kind of couple that waved politely and kept curtains drawn. Ethan liked it that way. Order was easier when no one looked too closely. He rinsed a mug, dried it carefully, and placed it upside down, aligning it with the others. Precision soothed him. Control made the noise in his head behave. Lena should have been there. The thought arrived without emotion, like a checklist item. Her shoes were not by the door. Her phone did not buzz on the counter. Ethan preferred the silence she left behind. Silence could not argue. Silence could not threaten to ruin things. He walked to the basement door and paused. The hum grew louder, deeper, almost alive. Cold air seeped through the frame, brushing his ankles. Ethan rested his palm against the door, feeling the vibration, and smiled faintly. 5 days, he thought, maybe less. The cold was efficient. It erased problems without leaving marks. Memory flickered unwanted. Lena standing in the doorway weeks ago, voice shaking but eyes clear. She had said his name like a question, like a warning. He had answered with patience, with reason, with love sharpened into something else. People always misunderstood what mercy looked like. Upstairs, the house settled. Pipes clicked. Wind dragged itself along the siding. Ethan checked his watch, then his phone. No messages. Good. He moved back to the kitchen, switched off the light, and let the dark claim the room. The basement door creaked when he opened it. The hum filled the space completely now, drowning thought. The freezer stood against the far wall, industrial, immaculate, its surface clean enough to reflect his face back at him. He leaned forward, listening, counting his breaths. He told himself this was necessary, that endings required courage others lacked. Love, he believed, was proven by what one was willing to destroy. The freezer had been purchased months earlier, delivered without questions, paid in cash. He remembered signing the receipt, his signature steady, his future simplified. Down here, time felt suspended, measured only by the machine's rhythm. Each minute shaved away resistance, memory, warmth. He imagined tomorrow's routine, the explanations rehearsed, the sympathy he would receive. Tragedy made people generous. They stopped asking why and started offering help. Ethan inhaled slowly, tasting metal and cold, convincing himself the hardest part was already over. He ignored the quiet doubt rising, the whisper insisting plans fail, that cold preserves secrets, and secrets, once frozen, sometimes refuse silence at any cost. From inside, something tapped once, soft. Deliberate, Ethan's smile disappeared as the sound came again, louder, followed by a weak, unmistakable knock. Darkness pressed against Lena Carter's eyes long before she understood she was awake. Cold owned everything. It gnawed at her skin, her bones, her thoughts, until pain became noise and noise became silence. She tried to inhale and felt ice scrape her throat, stealing breath in shallow, useless sips. The knock came again, but this time it was hers. She did not remember entering the freezer. Memory arrived in fragments, broken glass images that cut when she touched them. Ethan's face hovered first, calm and patient, explaining nothing while promising everything. The basement light, the sudden shove, the door slamming with a finality that sounded like betrayal. Lena's fingers were numb, stiff, but she forced them to move, dragging her hand across the metal wall. Frost clung to her skin, tearing away warmth she no longer had to spare. She screamed once. The sound died instantly, swallowed by insulation and steel. Panic surged, then collapsed into a dangerous stillness. She counted breaths because counting felt like living. 1, 2, 3. Each exhale burned less than the last, which frightened her more than the pain. She pressed her knees to her chest, teeth chattering so violently she feared they would shatter. Her wedding ring burned against her finger, a circle of ice she could not remove. Time lost meaning. Darkness erased hours, maybe days. Hunger flickered, then vanished. Thirst screamed and then whispered. Lena talked to herself to stay awake, to stay real. She recited memories, good ones at first, road trips, laughter, promises spoken in warm kitchens that felt like another lifetime. Then the memories changed. Ethan correcting her words, Ethan choosing her clothes, Ethan deciding when apologies were necessary and when silence was deserved. Love, she realized too late, had been taught to her as something earned, not given. The freezer was only the final lesson. Her body betrayed her next. Fingers stopped responding. Toes vanished entirely. A heavy calm settled in her chest, seductive and gentle, urging her to sleep. She welcomed it for one terrifying moment before fear snapped her awake. Sleep here meant disappearing. Somewhere beyond the walls, a sound vibrated through the metal. Footsteps, voices. Hope flared, sharp and painful. Lena slammed her fist against the door again and again until her arm felt detached, like it belonged to someone else. The freezer answered by growing colder. She noticed it slowly, the way one notices drowning after the lungs give up fighting. The hum deepened, steadier, stronger, the air sharpened. Frost thickened along the seams. This wasn't fading power, this was intention. Ethan hadn't forgotten. He hadn't left her to chance or mercy or malfunction. He had planned this moment, measured it, trusted the machine more than her heartbeat. The cold was not killing her by accident. It was doing exactly what it was told. Lena pressed her forehead to the door, tears freezing instantly on her lashes. Survival narrowed into one brutal truth. If the freezer stayed on, she would not last 5 days. Her mind raced, clinging to logic as fiercely as breath. Freezers shut off during outages, motors fail, breakers trip, but the hum never faltered. It stayed perfect, relentless, fed by power she could feel in her teeth. Somewhere above, a switch existed, untouched. Someone had checked it. Someone had decided the cold should continue, no matter what she begged, no matter how long she knocked. Understanding hit harder than frostbite. Ethan wasn't waiting for death. He was monitoring it. And as the temperature dropped again, Lena understood mercy had never been part of his plan at all tonight, inside ice. Morning arrived politely, as if nothing below the house mattered. Ethan Carter woke before his alarm, showered, shaved, and dressed in the gray suit Lena once said made him look trustworthy. He studied himself in the mirror, adjusting his tie until the knot obeyed. No bruises, no cracks, control intact. At the office, Ethan moved through greetings like a practiced ritual. Colleagues smiled, reassured by his calm voice and measured humor. He was the man people asked for advice, the man who stayed late, the man who never raised his voice. Trust followed him easily, it always had. He made sure of that. He signed documents, answered emails, laughed at the right moments. The hum of the building echoed the hum at home, steady and productive. When someone mentioned the storm, Ethan nodded, concerned but distant. Winter complicated things, accidents happened, people understood weather, they forgave delays caused by cold. A framed photo of Lena sat on his desk, angled just enough to be noticed. Coworkers paused, offered small comments about her smile, her warmth. Ethan accepted them graciously. He spoke of her in the present tense, careful not to oversell the performance. Grief worked best when it was subtle. Power to Ethan was never loud. It lived in anticipation, in being believed before proof was needed. He had learned that early, long before Lena. If you shaped the story first, truth spent the rest of its life trying to catch up. He checked his watch, calculating hours like inventory. Across town, a neighbor mentioned not seeing Lena's car. Ethan later planned how to answer that. She visited friends. She needed space. Marriage was complicated, but love endured. He practiced the lines silently, smoothing their edges until they sounded honest. At lunch, Ethan's phone vibrated. A private message preview appeared, quickly hidden by his thumb. He didn't open it yet. He preferred to let tension simmer. Secrets tasted better that way. He finished his meal, wiped his hands, and complimented the server. Kindness cost nothing and paid well. By mid-afternoon, the temperature outside dropped further. Power grids strained. Ethan's chest tightened briefly, then relaxed. He trusted preparation, backup generators, dedicated lines. Redundancy was the difference between plans and wishes. He excused himself, stepped into a quiet hallway, and finally unlocked his phone. He thought briefly of the basement, of the way cold behaved when left alone, expanding into every corner without asking permission. Machines were honest. They did not hesitate or feel. They completed the task given, no matter how uncomfortable the outcome appeared to others. Ethan admired that. People complicated endings with emotion, with doubt, with last-minute pleas that changed nothing except the memory of control. He had removed that variable. Above ground, he remained the same man he had always been, predictable and dependable. Below, consequences were unfolding on schedule. He imagined the freezer light, the seal, the temperature readout holding steady. 5 days was generous, he told himself, almost kind. Nature would take responsibility. All he had done was create the conditions. When this was over, sympathy would arrive wrapped in casseroles and lowered voices. Coworkers would shake their heads and say it was unthinkable. Friends would say there were no signs. Ethan would agree, carrying grief like a credential. He inhaled, steadying his pulse, and reminded himself that survival was unlikely when preparation was thorough. The thought settled him completely. Confidence replaced curiosity, and he refused to imagine failure, believing certainty itself could function as proof against any future question asked by anyone who mattered later. The message waited, simple and unadorned. "Is it done?" Ethan did not answer the message immediately. He locked his phone, slid it into his pocket, and let the question linger like perfume in an empty room. Secrets deserved patience. They grew sharper when starved of response. By the time he left the office, dusk had folded the city into shadow, and the storm returned with renewed purpose. Lena had uncovered the secret by accident, a receipt tucked into a coat pocket, a second phone hidden behind winter boots. A name saved without a last initial, Maya. The discovery hadn't come with screaming or rage. It came with silence, which frightened Ethan far more. Lena watched him differently after that, as if she were rearranging him in her mind, fitting new truths into old memories. The confrontation happened weeks later in the kitchen, under warm lights that now felt ironic. Lena's voice trembled, but her hands stayed steady. She didn't accuse. She asked questions. How long? How serious? How many lies had lived between them unnoticed? Ethan responded calmly, explaining, minimizing, reshaping reality until blame softened and doubt crept in. He told her she was imagining betrayal where there was only misunderstanding. He told her stress could distort perception. He told her love required trust. What he didn't expect was her refusal to forget. The secret poisoned everything after that. Lena noticed patterns, late meetings, unreachable hours, changed passwords. When Ethan realized control was slipping, he replaced affection with supervision. He corrected her tone, timed her outings, rewrote arguments until she apologized for starting them. The affair was no longer the danger, exposure was. On the night it ended, Lena stood in the basement doorway, holding the second phone. Her face was pale, resolved. She said she wouldn't scream. She said she wouldn't beg. She said she would leave. Ethan remembered thinking how cold her certainty felt. He remembered guiding her downstairs, his voice calm, his hand firm. The freezer door closing echoed louder than expected. Now, as Ethan drove home, the message vibrated again. He unlocked his phone at a red light. Maya's name glowed softly. He typed a single word, soon. He imagined her relief, her trust. He had promised her a future free of complications. Promises were easier when obstacles were temporary. The house greeted him with silence. He hung his coat carefully, wiped snow from his shoes, and descended the basement steps. The hum filled his chest, steady and faithful. He crouched beside the freezer, listening. Nothing. He straightened, satisfied. Inside, Lena drifted between consciousness and memory. Her thoughts circled the secret again, replaying the moment she realized Ethan's fear. Not of losing her, but of being seen. Her fingers brushed the wall, tracing grooves she hadn't noticed before. Shallow lines, old ones. Someone else had scratched here once, frantic and desperate. Understanding pierced the fog. She wasn't the first problem he had solved this way. Lena forced her hand to move, carving her own mark beside the others. Proof of life, proof of resistance. Her breath rattled as the cold deepened, but resolve hardened beneath it. If she vanished, she would not disappear quietly. Above her, Ethan checked the temperature gauge one last time and turned away, convinced the past was sealed. Below, Lena scratched again, deeper this time, and waited for the cold to answer. Darkness no longer frightened Lena. It dulled. It wrapped her thoughts in cotton and slowed the panic until fear felt optional, like a memory she could choose not to touch. By the third day, pain stopped screaming and began lying. Her body whispered that she was fine, that rest would help, that nothing mattered enough to stay awake for. She knew better. She forced her eyes open, blinking against frost that clung to her lashes. The freezer felt smaller now, the walls inching closer with every shallow breath. Her fingers were swollen, purple, barely hers. When she tried to move them, the delay terrified her more than the cold itself. Lena counted again, breaths, heartbeats, anything measurable. Time had become a rumor, unreliable and cruel. She remembered reading once that hypothermia made people calm before it killed them. The thought anchored her. Calm meant danger, calm meant lies. Her thoughts drifted, betraying her. She imagined warmth so vividly it hurt. Sunlight on her arms, steam rising from a mug. Ethan's hand on her back, guiding, steady. The image twisted, turning sour. That hand had learned pressure before comfort, direction before care. She laughed, a broken sound that barely existed. Love had been the longest con he ever ran. Her legs stopped responding entirely. Panic flared, sharp and brief, then collapsed into exhaustion. She leaned her head against the wall, forehead numb, and felt something unexpected. Grooves, deep ones, not the frantic scratches she had noticed before, but deliberate marks, spaced evenly, as if someone had tried to count days. Someone had survived long enough to track time. The realization burned hotter than fear. She wasn't alone in this history. The freezer wasn't a mistake or a moment of madness. It was a solution refined through silence. Lena pressed her palm over the marks, leaving heat she no longer possessed. The hum shifted slightly, a change so small it could be imagined. She held her breath, listening. The sound steadied again, stronger. The temperature dropped, her teeth no longer chattered. Her body was conserving energy, choosing surrender. She bit her tongue until she tasted blood, welcoming the pain, clinging to it like proof. If she slept, she would never wake up. Memory fractured again, uninvited. She saw herself packing a bag weeks ago, folding sweaters with shaking hands, rehearsing what freedom might sound like. She had planned to leave quietly, to survive without confrontation. Ethan had sensed the shift, noticed the absence of fear in her eyes. That was when his kindness sharpened, when reassurance became surveillance. Control, she understood now, was his native language. Her breathing slowed dangerously. She slapped her cheek hard, feeling almost nothing. She thought of her parents, of a childhood bedroom painted yellow, of promises she once believed were permanent. Each thought was a thread pulling her back from the dark. She refused to let his silence be the last word written over her life. She focused on mechanics. Cold slowed reactions, slowed blood, but machines overheated, motors failed. She dragged herself toward the corner, every inch stealing strength. Her shoulder struck metal, sending a dull vibration through the freezer. The hum wavered just for a second. Hope surged, dangerous and bright. She prayed without words, bargaining with nothing and everything, promising pain, truth, obedience, rebellion, anything that might keep her conscious 1 minute longer. She hit the wall again, weaker this time. Nothing changed, her vision narrowed. Black crept in at the edges, patient. She whispered her own name, afraid it would disappear if she didn't say it out loud. A sound cut through the hum, footsteps. Above her, not Ethan's careful pace, but lighter, uneven. A second set followed, hesitant. Voices murmured, too muffled to understand. Lena summoned everything left inside her and struck the door once more. This time, the footsteps stopped, suspended in a silence heavy with choice, and someone listened, finally. Footsteps hovered above the freezer, uncertain, shifting weight from heel to toe. Maya Lewis froze at the bottom of the basement stairs, one hand gripping the rail, breath shallow, heart racing faster than the storm outside. She had come unannounced, driven by a knot in her chest she could no longer ignore. Ethan's house smelled wrong, too clean, too cold. The silence pressed against her ears, louder than any argument. She told herself she was imagining it, that guilt made ghosts where none existed, but the sound came again, a dull thud, metal answering flesh, Maya. She called, hating the tremor in her voice. The hum filled the space, low and constant, vibrating through her bones. She took a step closer, then another, drawn by instinct she wished she didn't possess. The freezer stood against the wall like a sealed confession. Frost traced its edges, pristine and deliberate. She remembered Ethan's reassurances. Soon, just be patient, complications take time. He had spoken of Lena as if she were already gone, an inconvenience dissolving naturally. Maya had believed him because believing was easier than asking what soon truly meant. Another knock came from inside, weak, human. Maya staggered back, nausea rising. Her hand flew to her mouth as understanding crashed through her. This wasn't absence. This was containment. She pressed her ear to the metal, listening past the hum, past her own pulse. Faint rasp answered, breathing. "Oh my God," she whispered. Her phone slipped from numb fingers and clattered to the floor. She fumbled for it, hands shaking, thoughts colliding. Call the police, open the door. Run. Ethan's voice echoed in her memory, calm and certain, warning her about mistakes that couldn't be undone. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Maya turned as Ethan appeared, framed by the doorway, expression unreadable. For a moment neither spoke. The freezer hummed between them, loyal and patient. "What are you doing here?" he asked softly. She couldn't answer. She pointed instead, accusation trembling in her outstretched hand. "She's alive." Ethan's gaze flicked to the freezer, then back to Maya. Something hardened behind his eyes, something old and sharp. "You shouldn't be here," he said, stepping closer. His voice carried no panic, only calculation. "You told me it was over," Maya said, tears spilling despite her effort to stay composed. "You told me she was gone." "I told you it would be," he replied. The honesty chilled her more than the room. He reached for her phone, but she pulled it back, clutching it like a weapon. "I'm calling for help," she said, "right now." Ethan smiled, slow and careful. "Think about what you're hearing," he said. "Think about what happens if you open that door. This doesn't end cleanly." Another knock came, louder this time, desperate. Maya sobbed, trapped between terror and responsibility. She had wanted love, not blood. She had wanted escape, not complicity. The hum deepened almost imperceptibly as Ethan's hand moved toward the temperature control. "Choose," he said quietly, and as the cold intensified, Maya realized whatever she did next would decide who survived the night. Her mind raced through consequences she had avoided naming. Sirens would shatter the lie she'd accepted. Doors would open that could never close again. Ethan watched her with the patience of someone certain time favored him, fingers resting near the dial, ready to erase sound, memory, evidence. Below them, the knocking faded, replaced by a thin whimper that cut through Maya's hesitation. She thought of every compromise that had led her here, every silence purchased with comfort. Courage arrived late but sharp. She raised the phone, thumb hovering, breath breaking, knowing that whatever followed would burn every bridge behind her and expose a truth colder than the freezer itself, a truth already demanding to be heard. Above, the lights flickered once, as if the house itself hesitated, listening, waiting, complicit, afraid of the choice. Night pressed against the windows as Ethan closed the distance between them. Maya's thumb hovered over the screen, the emergency number half-typed, breath hitching as the hum thickened beneath their feet. Ethan spoke softly, the way he always did when control mattered most. "You don't want this," he said. "Think." She shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "She's dying, or sleeping," he replied calmly. "Hypothermia lies." Another whimper rose from the freezer, thin and fading. Ethan reached past Maya and turned the dial a fraction lower. The sound deepened, satisfied. Maya flinched, her resolve cracking under the noise. "This ends now," he said, "for all of us." Maya backed into the workbench, fingers slipping on oil and dust. She remembered the first night Ethan told her he was trapped in a loveless marriage, how carefully he placed blame on circumstance. She remembered believing him because belief felt generous. Now generosity tasted like blood. She pressed the phone to her chest. "Open it." Ethan smiled without warmth. "If I do, you'll never leave." The truth landed heavy. He wasn't threatening her. He was explaining her future. She saw herself folded into his life like furniture, useful and silent. The freezer knocked again, weaker this time. Maya screamed and slammed the phone onto the bench. The screen shattered. The emergency call connected anyway, speaker crackling. "Stay where you are." A voice said. Ethan lunged. Maya ran. She tore up the stairs, slipping, shouting the address through sobs. Ethan followed, steps measured, conserving energy. He caught her at the top, twisting the phone away. The call dropped. Silence returned, thick and accusing. "You just made this harder," he said. Below them, the hum surged. Ethan paused, listening. Doubt flickered. He hadn't planned for interruption. He dragged Maya back down and knelt at the freezer, pressing his ear to the metal. Nothing. He adjusted the dial again, chasing certainty. Inside, Lena felt the cold spike like a blade. Darkness pooled. She scraped her ring once against the wall. A final mark. "It's over," Ethan said. Maya bit his hand. He cursed. She lunged for the breaker panel and yanked the main switch. The house exhaled. The hum faltered and died. Ethan stared. "What did you do?" Lights went out. The freezer fell silent. In the dark, a breath answered from inside. Blue lights spilled through the windows as doors crashed open above. Maya pulled at the handle, whispering promises into the cold. Ethan shouted denials that dissolved under boots and commands. Time resumed, harsh and bright. Hands reached in, steady and sure. The freezer door opened wider, and the night loosened its grip as life fought back. Sirens wailed closer, sealing his fate. Someone called for a medic. Breathing mattered again. Justice was coming. Blue lights flooded the basement as boots thundered down the stairs. Orders overlapped, clipped and urgent, while gloved hands pulled Maya aside. Someone shouted for cutters. Someone else knelt, listening, counting. The freezer door groaned open inch by inch. Surrendering, cold like breath held too long. Lena lay folded within the steel, skin waxen, lips blue, eyelashes rimed with frost. A medic slid fingers to her neck, then nodded once. "Pulse," he said, surprised, weak but there. Oxygen hissed. A thermal blanket wrapped her, silver and unreal, while another medic checked pupils and murmured times and numbers into a radio. Detective Aaron Blake arrived last, tall and quiet, eyes cataloging details as if the room were speaking to him. He watched Ethan in cuffs, watched Maya shaking under a coat, watched the freezer, its dial turned too far. He said nothing yet. He never did at the beginning. They carried Lena up the stairs on a stretcher, the house seeming smaller with every step. Cold chased them, stubborn, clinging. Outside, snowflakes melted on her cheeks and left water like tears. The medic kept talking to her, voice steady, promising warmth, promising now. Lena did not answer. Her breath fluttered, irregular, fragile as paper. In the ambulance, machines beeped softly, translating life into lines and tones. Heat packs pressed against her core. Fluids ran. The medic leaned close. "Stay with me," he said. "You're doing great." He asked her name. She swallowed, fought the fog, and whispered it once, barely sound. At the hospital, lights burned bright and merciless. Doctors moved fast. Hypothermia protocol. Core temperature rising by fractions. Fingers thawed enough to ache. Pain returned, sharp and welcome. Somewhere between shivers, Lena drifted, not into sleep, but into memory that refused distance. She saw the scratches, counted them again, heard the dial turn, heard Ethan's voice explaining kindness like a rule. Her jaw tightened as warmth spread. Survival had not erased anything, it had preserved it. Blake stood behind glass while nurses worked, listening as a doctor summarized findings. 5 days, severe exposure, unlikely survival. Blake nodded, eyes narrowing at the word unlikely. He asked one question. "Does she remember?" The doctor hesitated, hard to say. He replied, "Sometimes the cold protects the brain." Blake watched Lena's chest rise and fall, watched the rhythm stabilize. He believed in patterns. He believed in what people forgot and what they couldn't. He stepped inside when allowed, introduced himself softly. Name first, badge second. He did not rush. Lena opened her eyes. The room swam, then steadied. She focused on Blake's face, on the lines around his eyes that suggested patience. He waited. "I remember," she said, voice rough, unmistakable. Blake leaned closer, the faintest nod acknowledging a door had opened. "Then we'll take it slow," he said, "but we'll take it all." Down the hall, Ethan shouted innocence to no one who listened. Paperwork began, timelines assembled, evidence warmed, thawing into clarity. In the room, Lena closed her eyes again, not to hide, but to hold every detail in place, ready for what came next. Monitors ticked steadily as night deepened, and nurses exchanged glances that mixed relief with caution. Outside the room, Blake spoke quietly with a uniformed officer, assigning tasks, preserving scenes, securing the freezer as evidence. He knew preservation mattered as much as rescue. Across the corridor, Maya sat wrapped in borrowed wool, answering questions in fragments, guilt spilling faster than facts. She kept looking at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. Blake noted that too. Near midnight, Lena stirred again. Heat had returned enough to hurt, enough to wake anger. She opened her mouth and a name rose unbidden, sharp as glass. Ethan. The machines caught her quickened pulse. A nurse asked her to rest, but Blake lifted a hand, granting permission. Lena whispered dates, places, the second phone, the dial. Each word landed like a pin on a map, drawing a route no one could ignore. Blake listened without interrupting, recognizing the sound of a survivor choosing testimony over silence. When she finished, he closed his notebook slowly. Tomorrow, he said, we begin. The cold had failed, but truth was only beginning its work. Morning light crept into the interview room, pale and unforgiving. Detective Aaron Blake sat across from Ethan Carter, recorder blinking red, a file open but untouched. Ethan's wrists were cuffed to the table, posture perfect, eyes calm. He asked for water, he thanked the officer, control still clung to him like cologne. Blake began with small truths, name, address, marriage length. Ethan answered smoothly, rehearsed cadence intact. When Blake mentioned the freezer, Ethan frowned, confusion practiced to precision. Accidents happened, he said, machines malfunctioned, winter complicated everything. Blake let the words fall and did not argue. Across the hall, Lena lay propped against pillows, heat aching into her bones. A nurse adjusted her Roman 4 and left the door open. Blake had asked for that. He believed sound carried courage. Lena listened to footsteps, to voices passing, grounding herself in the present. She remembered the dial, the hum, the way time disappeared. Maya sat with a victim advocate, hands wrapped around a paper cup. She told her story in fragments, shame-breaking sentences apart. Blake listened later, quietly, mapping contradictions. Fear explained some lies. Love explained others, but the freezer explained everything. Back in the room, Blake slid a photo across the table. Scratches inside steel, close, deliberate. Ethan's jaw tightened just once. Those aren't mine, he said. Blake nodded. I didn't say they were. Silence expanded, revealing its shape. Blake changed direction. He asked about finances, cash withdrawals, an appliance purchased months earlier, a storage unit rented and abandoned. Ethan shrugged, smiling faintly. Preparation, he said, was not a crime. Blake agreed. Then he placed another photo down, older, grainy, a missing woman from 3 winters ago. Last seen near a rental property Ethan once managed. The hum returned in Ethan's ears. He leaned back, crossing his legs with care. Coincidence, he said. The city was full of missing people. Blake leaned forward. This one scratched days into a wall. He said softly, 7 marks, same spacing. Ethan's eyes flicked away. Blake continued, voice steady. Her car was found in snow. No prints. No witnesses. We missed it then. He paused. Will won't now. In the hospital, Lena spoke again, voice stronger. She described the other marks, the feeling of history beneath her hands. She described realizing she was not the first. Blake listened, recording every word. Trauma did not blur her memory, it sharpened it. When Blake returned, he played a short clip. Lena's voice filled the room, calm and certain. Ethan's smile vanished. He stared at the table, at his reflection warped in metal. She's confused, he said, too quickly. Blake waited. Truth needed space. The room felt colder as minutes passed. Ethan's breathing changed. Control slipped, not dramatically, but measurably. Blake asked one final question. How many times did you check the dial? Ethan looked up. Enough, he said, then stopped. The mistake hung there, undeniable. Blake stood, signaling the end. We'll talk again, he said, after warrants. As Ethan was led away, Blake stepped into the hall where Lena waited, eyes clear. There's more, he told her. She nodded. She had known the cold kept secrets, but truth, once thawed, traveled fast, and it was already moving toward him. Outside, snow began again, softening edges, hiding tracks, pretending nothing had changed. Blake watched officers load evidence, seal bags, photograph dials, measure scratches, log times. He felt the weight of patterns settling into proof. Tomorrow would bring hearings, motions, faces trained to doubt. Ethan would perform innocence for strangers. Blake would answer with patience. He believed justice was not loud, it was thorough. He glanced back at Lena, who met his eyes without fear. She understood what came next: repetition, questions, the long walk through memory. She also understood survival carried obligation. Somewhere, another family waited for answers they never expected to receive. Blake opened his notebook again, writing a name long ignored, drawing a line from winter to winter. The case widened, cold and exacting, and as sirens faded, the night promised a reckoning that would test everyone who touched it. It would begin at dawn, in a courtroom where truth would face denial, and the past would finally be named, counted, and answered for good. The courtroom smelled of old wood and anticipation. Morning light cut through high windows, revealing faces trained to doubt. Ethan Carter sat at the defense table, suit immaculate, expression rehearsed. Across the aisle, Lena sat wrapped in quiet strength, hands steady. Detective Aaron Blake took his place behind the state, patient as ever. The trial unfolded like thawing ground, slow but irreversible. Witnesses spoke of storms, outages, and a husband everyone trusted. The defense leaned on coincidence, on malfunction, on Winter's cruelty. Blake answered with receipts, timestamps, and photographs of scratches counted into steel. Lena testified last. Her voice did not shake. She described the hum, the dial, the choice made repeatedly. Jurors leaned forward as if warmth traveled with truth. Ethan watched without blinking. When cross-examined, he performed confusion until it cracked. The prosecutor asked one question too many. Ethan corrected her timeline, precise and unnecessary. The room noticed. During a recess, Blake placed a final exhibit into evidence. It was a ring, Lena's ring, etched by frost, recovered from the freezer drain. Inside the band, barely visible, were numbers, dates not hers. Blake explained they matched a missing woman's last known week. A gasp rippled. Ethan stood shouting, and the judge's gavel cut him down. The jury deliberated less than a day. Verdict read, the words landed clean and heavy, guilty, on all counts. Ethan's shoulders slumped, control finally gone. Sentencing followed swiftly. Life without parole for attempted murder, plus additional years reopened. Families from Winter's past wept. Justice did not raise its voice. It closed a door. Outside, Lena breathed cold air and felt warmth hold. Reporters asked how she survived. She answered simply. Someone listened. As deputies led Ethan away, he glanced back once. Lena met his eyes and did not look away. The cold had failed, but accountability was just beginning. In chambers, the judge addressed a sealed motion. Blake stood beside Lena, silent. She nodded permission. The motion unsealed evidence Lena had hidden for years, a journal page pressed inside insulation, photographed before rescue. It named a witness still alive. The judge ordered protection immediately. Blake exhaled. The case widened again. Lena felt fear flicker, then purpose. She had survived to speak, and speaking carried weight. Blake promised care, not silence. Tomorrow would bring classrooms, shelters, and hearings. Today closed one door and opened many. The verdict could not be escaped. As dusk settled, Lena stood on the courthouse steps, steady. She understood justice was a process, not a moment. It demanded memory, patience, and community. Behind her, Blake fielded calls, arranging safeguards. Ahead, microphones waited. Lena chose not to speak yet. There would be time to teach. Inside, paperwork continued, signatures sealing consequences. Ethan disappeared into custody, smaller than his plans. The freezer became evidence, not a threat. Cold lost its power when named. Lena touched her bandaged hand and felt the ache. Pain meant circulation. Circulation meant life. She thought of the witness named, waiting somewhere. Protection would reach them tonight. Blake met her again, eyes kind. He said one thing, tomorrow we build. Lena nodded, feeling the future move. The verdict closed a chapter. The work would open a curriculum. Justice had been served, but responsibility remained. She stepped forward, ready to begin that lesson. Snow fell lightly, forgiving nothing, covering everything. Lena breathed and did not rush. Survival had given her a voice. She would use it carefully. Inside the courthouse, a clerk stamped files. The stamp sounded final. Lena turned toward the city. Somewhere, classrooms would soon hear her story. It would teach warning signs, power, and escape. Tonight, she rested. Tomorrow, education would begin. Blake watched her go, thinking of systems that failed. He resolved to rebuild trust, case by case. The night accepted the courthouse, quiet at last. Ethan's shadow receded. Lena's did not. Ahead waited a society ready to learn. The lesson would be hard and necessary. Justice had opened the door. Education would keep it open. Lena smiled faintly, knowing the cold no longer owned the ending. The verdict stood, and the future stepped forward with her. It was time to teach survival before ice ever closed again. The lesson would save lives. Many winters, spring arrived quietly, not as forgiveness, but as proof that time moved whether people were ready or not. Lena Carter stood at a lectern in a community college auditorium, palms warm, voice steady, eyes unafraid. Rows of students, counselors, nurses, and officers listened not to a spectacle, but to instruction earned the hard way. She taught warning signs first, because prevention lived upstream from rescue. Control disguised as care, isolation framed as love, silence demanded as loyalty. She explained how manipulation cooled a room long before any freezer ever could. Detective Aaron Blake watched from the back, satisfied that justice had evolved into education. Afterward, survivors approached Lena with questions, with fear, with relief that someone had named the cold. She answered gently, never promising ease, always promising truth and options. At shelters, she trained staff to listen early, document patterns, and believe without delay. At schools, she taught boundaries as skills, not instincts, and safety as a shared responsibility. The freezer now sat in evidence storage, inert, measured, stripped of myth. Ethan Carter's appeals failed quietly, each denial another door closing without drama. Lena did not follow the updates closely. Survival required forward motion. When winter returned, she felt the ache but not the fear. Pain meant circulation, and circulation meant life continuing. In a final seminar, she closed with a lesson meant to outlast headlines. Ask early, document often, tell someone, and leave before silence hardens. Applause rose, not loud, but sustained, like warmth returning to fingers. Outside, Blake shook her hand and thanked her for choosing public good over private peace. She smiled, knowing peace multiplied when shared. The city moved on, better prepared, a little warmer where it mattered. Lena walked home under a clear sky, breath steady, future open. What the cold could not kill had become a curriculum, a warning, and a promise. She planned to return next week, then the week after, until the lessons felt ordinary. Ordinary was the goal, safety practiced without spectacle. At night, she wrote notes for survivors who would never meet her. Each note named resources, rights, and the courage to choose oneself. Blake sent updates when policies changed, and she revised slides accordingly. Systems learned slowly, but they learned. On anniversaries, Lena lit a candle for the unnamed and spoke their days aloud. Counting was no longer captivity, it was remembrance. She kept her ring, etched and imperfect, as a tool for teaching. Students passed it carefully, feeling cold history warm to purpose. The story ended where it should, in prevention rather than tragedy. Lena locked her door, brewed tea, and rested without fear. Justice had spoken, and education would keep speaking. Somewhere, a listener chose to leave early, and winter lost another victim. That was the ending Lena wanted. Not survival alone, but lives changed before ice ever closed. She turned off the light and slept. Tomorrow's schedule waited on the table, full of rooms and names. She would show up again and again until listening became habit. Habit saved lives. The cold receded into memory, powerless against preparation. Lena breathed, steady and warm, owning the ending. Education stood where fear once ruled. The lesson continued, passed hand to hand, season to season. What the cold could not kill now protected others. That was enough. She closed her eyes, trusting tomorrow to arrive prepared. It did. The house breathed easily. So did she. Outside, winter passed without ceremony, unnoticed. Inside, learning stayed. Lena smiled once more, then rested, ready. The future waited, open and warm. She met it without fear. Education had done its work, finally.